it just me or was November like 5 years long? I don't know why it feels like November was the longest month of the whole year, but I'm looking back at some of the books I read this month and it just feels like it's been so long since I read some of them. But it's the end of the month, so it's time to do the monthly wrap up. We've got to try to jog our memories and remember how we felt about some of these books. I just read a lot this month. I had a really good reading kick. I was going through a good spree of reading a lot of books. There was a readathon I helped co-host, so that helped me read a lot. I did a lot of audiobooks. There was just a lot going on. So honestly, some of these books I may not remember as well as others, and I'm just gonna have to tell you if I kind of liked them or kind of didn't. But I've never claimed to be a critical reviewer here. I'm just your average enthusiast who loves reading books and loves chatting about them with others. So if you're looking for a critical analysis, this isn't gonna be the place to be, but if you wanna know how I felt about the many different books that I read this November, then you're in the right place. As I usually do, we're gonna be going in order from least enjoyable to most enjoyable, but I had a really good reading month. Most of the books I read were above like a 3-star. I'm not fully rating books anymore, so you won't hear me give number ratings to all of these books, but generally that is the direction we're going as we talk about the books. First up, I'm going to start with the one book that I DNF'd this month, the one book I did not finish, and that was It Came From the Closet. In my brain, I read this full book, like I read everything I'm going to read. It's going to make sense in a minute, but technically I did not read every single part of this book. This is an anthology collection of essays that are all about horror movies. Each essay focuses on one or two different horror movies, and they are told from all different writers, and the essays come as these memoir type stories where the writer is using the horror movie as sort of a metaphor, certain types of symbols, things to connect to their own queer experience. I thought this was absolutely outstanding. All of the essays I read in this were so good, so well written, so wonderful, so moving. Such a good job illustrating the similarities between the horror movies and how they personally connected to them. I really enjoyed this. However, because each of these takes something from a horror movie, they're often spoilers, and so I only ended up reading the essays that were about movies that I've already seen. So that is why I didn't fully read every single part of this collection, because I didn't want to read the essays for certain movies I haven't seen and spoil them. But I also don't know if I'm interested in every single movie in this essay collection, so I don't really have a plan to go out and watch them all so that I can read every essay. However, there are some that I do want to rewatch and then reread the essay, like Jennifer's Body in particular. There was an essay penned by Carmen Maria Machado in this collection that uses Jennifer's Body and talks about the bisexual experience. And it's been a while since I've seen Jennifer's Body. I wanted to rewatch it for a while anyways, and so I do think it'd be fun to rewatch and then reread that one in particular and maybe a couple others. All that to say, highly recommend it. It was really well done. If you really like horror movies, if you are really interested in reading about the queer experience, if you really like memoir type essay writing, all of the above, it was amazing. It's misleading being the first one I talk about because I go least favorite to most favorite, but because I DNF'd it, I felt like I had to put it here. But really this would be like towards the end of my list if I was going in order of enjoyment, because it was just really good. Now going into the books that I did read, there was only really one book that I just didn't like. And even though I didn't like it, there are things that I did like about it. I liked the writing style of it all, but I just didn't like the story of it all. And that is Still Missing by Chevy Stevens. This was my first Chevy Stevens book. I've heard really good things about Chevy Stevens. Didn't really know what to expect, but this one intrigued me. Sounded like it'd be something I'd be interested in. In the story, you're following this woman named Annie O'Sullivan, who is a realtor, or she was a realtor, and one day she gets abducted. But in the story, you're following her after this abduction. She was abducted for like 18 months, and she is recounting the story of her abduction to a therapist, and so you're listening to her tell that story through flashbacks. So you're going back and forth in time of seeing how she is living after this abduction and how it's changed her life, and then also going back to understand why she was abducted and what happened during the time that she was abducted. It is brutal, it is dark, it is psychological, it is messed up, it is triggering. And so that is why I didn't fully enjoy this story, just because of the subject matter, and I wasn't anticipating it to really spend that much time in the abduction part of it, and I really just don't like reading about abduction. And so it just made me wildly uncomfortable a lot of the times, which isn't a flaw of the book, it's just a personal thing. So that's just why I didn't enjoy this one. It was more of a personal thing. I think the writing was fantastic. I see why people people would really enjoy Chevy Stevens' writing. I don't know if I'm going to pick up another thing from Chevy Stevens, but potentially. I would just want to be more careful about making sure I fully understand what the plot is going to be like before diving into it. But it did remind me a lot of Lucinda Berry. I've only read one Lucinda Berry, The Perfect Child, and the writing style felt really similar. The subject matter, like the depiction of darkness in human psyches and human psychology, felt kind of similar. So I do think if you like Lucinda Berry, you should probably check out Chevy Stevens, or if you like Chevy Stevens, you should probably check out Lucinda Berry. But this one just wasn't really for me. Next up, we have The Endless and Other Stories by Brandon Baker. If you don't know, Brandon Baker is actually a book talker. He gives horror book recommendations over on TikTok. He gives excellent recommendations. He reads all types of different horror, and this is his debut short story collection, so I was super excited to pick it up and support a fellow book community member. Short story collections are not my favorite thing. I'm trying to get more and more into them, but because this was someone that I follow, I thought it'd be interesting to just pick it up, and I just wanted to support someone in the community. If you do like short horror stories, this is a fun one to pick up. It's very short, it's very fast paced. There's I think 6-ish stories in here in total, and they're all really different. There's some quirkier ones, there's some funnier ones. It was really interesting to see Brandon's writing style come to life after seeing him give book recommendations and know what types of books he likes. He tends to talk about a lot of disturbing books, and so I wasn't sure if that's what this was going to be like, but then I did see him say this isn't necessarily super similar to the stuff that he likes to read and recommend with the disturbing stuff. This was more fun for him. Seems like this was a passion project, and you can feel that in the writing style of it. So if you're interested, if you follow Baker Reads and you didn't know that he read a book, here you go, check it out. And also, what a good cover, right? I mean, come on. What a great cover. Next up, we have The Family Game by Catherine Steadman. I thought I was going to really enjoy this one, but I didn't really love it. I also wasn't having the best week when I was reading this. Not like I wasn't having a good week in general in my life. I wasn't having a great reading week the one week that I was picking this up. I ended up doing something. Did I travel in November? I don't think I did, but for some reason this book dragged out a long time over like a whole week of reading, and I usually read books in like 2 or 3 days, especially thriller books. I usually read pretty quickly, but this one dragged out. I thought this one was going to be more fun than it was. It just wasn't as fun as I expected it to be. The idea behind the story is this woman's dating this man, and she's meeting his family over the holidays for the first time, and they play all these weird games. Particularly his dad gives her this cassette tape, and she thinks it's going to be a story he's telling or something because she's a writer, and she thinks maybe that's going to be how they connect. But actually on the tape is a gruesome confession, and then she doesn't know why he would have given her that, and she kind of starts investigating to figure out what's going on with this family. I thought it was fine. It just wasn't anything that I really loved, and again, it just took me so long to read it that I think that was part of the experience too. But I've heard a lot of other people really enjoying this. People are saying it's really fun and fast-paced, so give it a chance if it was something you're interested in. It just wasn't something that I personally loved a lot. Next up, we have Spy Family Volume 4. This is a manga series that I've been reading, and because it's the 4th volume, I won't tell you much, won't get spoilery, but I did like this one quite a bit. The cover of these books indicates which character you're going to be following most closely in the story. The whole manga series is about this guy who's a spy, and he has to build a fake family to infiltrate this academy, and his wife is an assassin, and his daughter is a mind reader, but he doesn't know these things. They're all keeping these secrets from one another, and in this story they get a dog. It's all about dogs. It did feel like more of a filler kind of story. It didn't feel as impactful to the whole narrative. This felt more like a side quest type of story, so I'm hoping that in the next volume we get back to the family aspects of it all, because I really like the found family parts of it and to see them connecting and bonding more. But overall, I'm still really enjoying the series, and I'm still planning on picking up the next ones. Next up, we have a couple of audiobooks I listened to this month all in a row. The first one is Ghost 19 by Simone St. James. This is a novella, I guess would be the best way to categorize it. It's very short. I think it was a 2-hour long audiobook, or maybe it was 4 and I listened to it at 2 times speed. It was a very quick audiobook listen, and I felt very average about it. It's very short. It is an audio exclusive right now, so you don't have any physical text to pick up to read, and it's just a good old ghost story. Just a good old-fashioned Simone St. James ghost story. It was cozy, it was atmospheric, it was a good listen all in one day while I was doing a puzzle. I really liked the atmosphere of the story, but it's not something incredibly memorable. The story is set back in the 50s to 60s, and you're following this actress who is moving out to the suburbs because a doctor told her that she was too stimulated in the city and needed to go live in the calmness of the suburbs, because what a classic hysterical woman, we must move her out to the suburbs. And once she's there in the house, she has a lot of troubles. sleeping. She can't leave the house for some reason, and she spends a lot of time watching her neighbors. And then she sees something happen outside of her window. She thinks a murder's taken place, and she starts to try to investigate it. So it is a very classic feel of a story that you've read before, but it was just a good, fun, quick, short listen. I really enjoy everything I've read from Simone St. James. I never feel like her stuff is a standout favorite for me personally. It's never like top tier, oh my goodness, that was so unique and I loved it. But I always have a good time with her stuff. So if you're looking for something quick to just listen to, maybe on a rainy day, maybe on a little bit of a longer drive you have to do, maybe you've got some chores to do around the house, this was a good, fun, cozy, spooky time. Next up we have House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. This is a story about this woman who's going to be a blood maid at this estate for this woman named Count Lisavette. This is sort of a fantasy gothic horror. There is this like world building element to it that you sort of need to understand, but it's not overly complicated, and you spend a lot of time just at the estate. So it was really interesting how there's this complex world system that's going on that affects everything that's going on, but it's a very contained claustrophobic story just in this estate, which in some ways I really liked, and in some ways I wish we would have explored more of the world building. So this is another book where I'm like, I enjoyed it, but there was something that prevented me from fully loving it, and I can't fully put my finger on what it was. And then there's the part of me that thinks I wanted more world building, but I'm like, was it the point to have it be contained and feel that claustrophobia, and that's what made it so good? So I'm kind of like toggling with how I fully feel about this one, kind of between like and love. But overall, I really enjoyed the atmosphere of this story. I really enjoyed just the suspense of it. This is a very alluring book. I feel like that's the best way to explain it. Like, it really pulls you in. It's very lush in the prose and the descriptions of the setting, what's going on, and there's this like sapphic relationship starting to develop between the Countess and Blood Maid potentially. So all you really need to understand about the world building is this girl is coming to be a Blood Maid, which means that she is going to give her blood to the Countess. That will help her restore her health. So that's this world that they live in where there's all these blood maids. You can make good money doing it. It can set you up for life. She is left really with no other options in life, and so she decides to go do this. But once she is there, she starts to realize that blood maids are going missing, and she wants to figure out what's going on. I definitely enjoyed this book more than the previous novel I read from Alexis Henderson, The Year of the Witching, but both have that similar, just like really good atmosphere. When I think of them, I remember them both fondly. I feel like I can get placed back in that headspace of where I was. I feel like Alexis Henderson is just really good at building atmosphere, building the setting, building the tone of the story. The audiobook of this one was incredible too. Really loved the audiobook experience of it. So I don't know, the more I talk about it, the more I'm like talking myself into loving it, but overall there just wasn't a ton happening in the story. It was very slow paced. I think I remember it taking to about the 70% mark to feel like, all right, now the story is getting going. But it was also sort of intended to be that way. So I don't know, I have complicated feelings about this one, but it was an enjoyable experience. I am glad I read it, and it's one that I'll be excited to see more people's thoughts on as more people are picking it up. Next up, we have Jackal by Erin E. Adams. This is a story about this Black woman who is returning to her small town for her friend's wedding. And in this small town, Black girls keep going missing in the woods. So our main character is very afraid of the woods because of something she witnessed back in her youth and just things she knows or feels about the woods. So she's not super excited to be coming back to this area. She also has sort of strained familial relationships, so she's just not gonna have the best time, but she's going back for her friend's wedding. But when she does, her friend's daughter is the next girl to go missing in the woods, and then it starts bringing back these memories for her, and then she starts investigating why these Black girls keep going missing in the woods. I think by the time you see this wrap up, you'll have seen my vlog where I read Jackal, so I'll link that down below so you can see my full reading experience. It kind of took me on a little bit of a roller coaster the whole time, and I've heard very mixed reviews about it along the way, and I feel like it's a book that there's so much to say, there's so much to unpack. Overall, I think this book does a good job on the social commentary piece of it all. I think it is well written, especially for a debut. I just personally wanted a little bit more from the story the whole time. I just wished more was happening throughout it, because this is another one that felt like quite a slow burn before you get to the end. And in this one, it's really until like about the 90% point, and then things just start happening. And I really would have liked to see more of that earlier in the story to start seeing some more consequences of that playing out. But again, maybe it was intended to be that way. This is a book that kind of toes the line of both horror and thriller mystery elements. So I think that also kind of changes your expectations for the pacing, because if this is a thriller, you're expecting a twist at the 50% mark that really gets the stories going. But if it's going to be primarily a horror book, then you're going to expect expect that more slow burn probably. I personally feel like this is more of a horror book, like a social horror book, but it also has mystery thriller elements. It's like just the perfect blend of them. So it kind of makes it difficult to know what I really would have wanted in the pacing of the story, I guess. But yeah, overall I enjoyed this one. I'm definitely gonna read from this author again since this was her debut. I'm excited to see what she does in the future. And I read this one in this month in particular because it was Gabby from Gabby Reads book club pick, and she had her live discussion a couple of days ago on her channel with Bree from Lockbooktition, and Bree personally really loved the story. She gave it 5 stars and she had a lot of really intelligent things to say about it. So I definitely recommend checking that out for more thoughtful analysis on that one, especially if you read it and you enjoyed it and you do want to hear someone gush over it. That would be a good place to go. Hello, editing Ashley popping in right here because I did finish one more book in the month of November that I needed to tell you about. It just wasn't going to make sense to carry it over to the next month because I did a vlog with this book too, and that is Secluded Cabin Sleeps Six by Lisa Unger. You can go check out my latest vlog where I read new thriller and horror books if you want to hear my full thoughts and experience with this book. I will have that linked in the description down below so you can get to that super easily. But I did want to also include a quick little update in my wrap up as well for how I felt about this book. I ended up enjoying this book for the most part, but I had a weird experience with it. It felt a little bit disconnected. It went in a direction that I wasn't fully expecting it to go. What this story is about is this group of couples and siblings and their partners who are all going on this little vacation to this little cabin in this little secluded remote area. They end up getting stormed in there. They're stuck there and secrets start to come out. Someone also may be watching them, and it's a mystery thriller from there. When I started this book, I had really high hopes for it. I thought it was going to be everything I wanted because it kind of felt like The Guest List by Lucy Foley, which I really enjoyed when that came out. You get a lot of different characters, you have a lot of different POVs, there's a lot of different secrets, there's different timelines, there's the atmosphere of them being in the secluded cabin. You've got POVs that you don't really know who they are or how they're connected to the story, and so you're trying to solve that as well as you're reading the book. But the direction that it takes and the things that are explained just weren't exactly what I was expecting, and with everything that comes out of it, I thought it was very interesting. I think it has some really cool concepts, but I almost wish the book would have fully committed to what it talks about in the second half of the book. Of course, it all makes sense and there are all these things leading to it and these hints, but it just didn't feel like it was taking full advantage of a really interesting idea to unpack there. So I also talk about it in full spoilers in the reading vlog. If you've read the book and you want to know what I'm talking about, or if you don't plan on reading the book and you want to know what I'm talking about, you can hear my spoilers in the reading vlog where I talk about exactly what I mean by that. But overall, I still had an okay time with the book. It just isn't a new favorite of mine. I would put it in the category of like, not love. Next up, we have The Lies I Tell by Julie Clark. I decided to finally pick this one up because it was such a popular thriller this year. I was really surprised with how popular it was. I didn't fully understand why it was, and I still kind of don't fully understand why it was so popular, but I was getting the FOMO and I really wanted to read this one by the end of the year, so I decided to pick it up. This is the same author of the book The Last Flight, which I read last year and ended up DNFing because I didn't like the writing style of it, but in this one I like the writing style a lot more. So that was interesting to see just how different it felt to me. I was kind of going in worried that I would have the same problem, but I had no problem with the writing style in this. This is a story where you're following these two women who both have secrets and are both interested in the other. And it's kind of like a cat and mouse game. You're getting both of their perspectives and you're trying to understand their histories for both of them, the motives for both of them. And I feel like that's all you really need to know. I really like books like that. I love books where people are keeping secrets. I love cat and mouse games. I love getting two perspectives and seeing scenes in a different light because you're like, oh, this is what that person was thinking and now I know, and like play back the tape. I totally see why that went that way. I think that's really cool. However, this book's just not going to be super memorable for me. I already kind of forgot some things about it. It just didn't feel like a standout. And in particular, what I think my biggest problem with it is that the two women's perspectives did feel really similar to read. They didn't feel different enough to me. They are different characters. They have different circumstances, but I think their names are like Meg and Cat. Meg and Cat, yeah. So just like, I don't know, something about a Meg and a Cat, it just wasn't distinct enough for me. And every time it would switch perspectives, I had to remind myself whose perspective I was reading. And it did get easier as I was going along, getting immersed in the story, but that does contribute to it being a little bit less memorable for me. I will say I did read it very fast. It was a very fast read. I read it in 1 or 2 days. It was very compelling as I was reading it. I wanted to know what was going to happen next and figure out where the story was going. So I do see how it is an enticing thriller, but it didn't feel overly original or outstanding or super favorite for me. I just had a good time with it while I read it, but it's not one I'm really going to remember. Next up, we have Cirque Berserk. This was the buddy read for the Slaughterfest Readathon, which was a readathon that I helped co-host in the beginning of November. This is a fun little novella that is a slasher. You're following this group of teens who are going to this abandoned park, and then people start getting slashed. I had so much fun with this. It was such a quick read. It had an unexpected reveal or turn to the story that I wasn't expecting, and I just had a lot of fun. I read it super fast. I thought it was a really solid novella. I don't know if it's in that top tier of favorites for me for my favorite horror novellas, but it is certainly one I would recommend, and it's definitely one that I will be thinking about. It also turns out that this is part of this Rewind or Die series of novellas, which are all of these horror novellas that are set in like the 70s, 80s, or 90s, and there's a couple more in that series that I'm interested in picking up. They're not connected in that you have to read them in order or anything, but it just seemed like it'd be interesting to check them out after reading this one. So super glad I read it, definitely recommend it, and it was a really fun buddy read. Next up is The Prisoner by B.A. Paris. This is B.A. Paris's latest book, and the premise of this story is that this woman ends up getting abducted and she feels safer with her abductor than she does with her husband. That's all you need to know. I had a really fun time with this one. I really enjoyed it. I just really enjoy B.A. Paris's writing. It is just really engaging. It's really fast-paced. I like her characters. I just like where her stories go. I always have a good time with her stuff. This one is not super memorable to me either. This is a book where I had a good time, but not a super memorable time. It's not incredibly unique in any way really, but it's just an exciting, fast-paced thriller. I read it very quickly. I would definitely recommend it. It feels like a little bit more of a popcorn thriller, you know, if you're just looking for a beach read or a rainy afternoon read, something to help you get out of a reading slump. That's kind of how I would recommend B.A. Paris's books. At least for me, that's how I personally experience them, but I thought this one was really fun. I know I said earlier in this video that I don't like abduction stories, so you may be kind of surprised when I say it's a story about this woman getting abducted and I had such a good time with it, but just the nature of how it was explored in this book was comfortable for me. It didn't make me uncomfortable, and that's hard to explain, but if you read the book, I feel like you're gonna know what I mean. The direction the story takes, why she gets abducted, how she's abducted, like what's going on with all of that, that didn't make me feel too uncomfortable to not enjoy the story. So hopefully that makes sense. I feel like it's gonna make sense if you read it, but if you're wondering if you should pick it up, if you enjoy other stuff from B.A. Paris, I would definitely say this is worth picking up as well. Next up, we have The Between by Tananarive Due. This was my first book from Tananarive Due, and I will definitely be reading more because this was so very good. It was so well written. The characters felt so real. This felt so cinematic. It felt like a movie I was watching. It was just excellent writing. In the story, you're following this guy who almost died when he was a child. He got swept up in the current in the ocean, but his grandmother saved him, but in the act of saving him, she ended up dying, and so he carries and harbors a lot of guilt, a lot of survivor's guilt from that, and a lot of unprocessed trauma from his childhood that he isn't even really fully understanding. You're following him as an adult when he's married, he has children, and his wife, who is a recently elected judge, I believe. She's some part of the government justice system. She ends up getting these threatening racist notes, and that starts to trigger a lot of things in him, feeling the need to protect his family and also not dealing with all these other things that have been going on. And this triggers a lot of nightmares again, which is an issue he used to have that he was good for a while from, but now he's starting to have all this again because of this high stress moment. And you're pretty much just watching him completely spiral on the edge of a breakdown. And it was so well done. It was such an incredible book, such an incredible story, really interesting the direction that it takes, really slow burn, really literary. Don't expect this to be a thriller, it's not a thriller, but it was just such a good psychological horror, such a good social horror with the elements of racism coming into the story as well. And I was just so pulled in by these characters. This was just so good. And the reason I ended up picking it up this month was for the Slaughterfest Readathon. One of the prompts was to read a book outside of your comfort zone. So I decided to use this for that prompt because it was published, I believe, back back in the 90s, and it is outside of my comfort zone to read books that were published more than like 10 years ago. I'm usually reading stuff honestly within like the past 5 years, and really I'm mostly reading newly published stuff in that given year. So I really put off a lot of backlist books, a lot of stuff that was published any more than 10 years ago or so. But I am so glad I decided to go out of my comfort zone with this one because it was just so good. And I think next what I'm going to be picking up from Tanana Redo is probably going to be The Good House, because I've heard really good things about that one. But I was also looking into her other stuff, and My Soul to Keep looks really interesting. Like, all of it sounds really interesting. So I'm really glad I just found another great author to explore more of her works. But yeah, if you haven't picked this up, if you've been vaguely interested in it, if you've never heard of it, whatever state you're in, I would highly recommend picking it up. Next up, we have A Sliver of Darkness, which is an anthology collection of short stories from CJ Tudor. This is her first time publishing a collection of short stories, and so I didn't know what to expect with it, but I have read every novel that CJ Tudor has published, and I've enjoyed them all. I've really loved some of them, so I was really eager to see what this was going to be like, and I had a really good experience with this. Like I said earlier, short story collections don't always do it for me, but this one I really loved, which isn't really a surprise because I do really love CJ Tudor's writing. This was featured in the latest vlog I did, so I'll have that link below if you want to see my full experience. I talk about every single story, which ones I like best. I stack rank them so you can see all of my full thoughts in that video if you'd like. But yeah, overall, really enjoyed it. It is a mix of horror stories, thriller mystery stories, weird quirky stories, some really unique ideas in here. There were only a couple stories that would be like a thumbs down for me that I didn't really personally love or connect to. For the most part, I really enjoyed a lot of the stories, and I really loved a few of them. The Copy Shop in particular was my favorite of the collection. But yeah, I really loved it. CJ Tudor can do no wrong in my opinion, and I really can't wait to read The Drift, which is going to be her next novel, which comes out in just a couple of months. This made me even more excited for it. Just really renewed my love of CJ Tudor's writing, so I'm really looking forward to her next book. For the next book, I need to say, sometimes you just read a book and you just know that you love it. You may not remember everything about it, you may not be able to discuss it in detail, elements of it may escape your mind pretty quickly, but you just loved it. It was an amazing experience when you read it, and it's okay that you can't write a whole essay about why you loved it, but you just know that you loved it and it really resonated with you. And that is how I feel about this next book, which is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. I have heard incredible things about this all year long, so I was really excited to get to it, but it is a little bit outside of my typical reads because it is a romance story. I only pick up a couple romances a year, and I was really hoping this one would be worth it, and it absolutely was. I loved this one. This just felt so fresh and unique for the romance genre. I'm definitely not one to speak on the romance genre because I probably read like 10 or less romance books a year. I am not a prolific romance reader, but I will say what I do read of romance, especially contemporary romances, a lot of stuff that's like the top 10 romances of the year, a lot of it has started to feel sort of similar to me, or at least you know what to expect. You know the common plot points, you know the common tropes, and I don't think that's just a romance thing. That happens with thriller books too, that happens with horror books too. Like, it just happens with popular commercial fiction and genres. Things get reduced to tropes a lot of times, and things start to feel these familiar patterns. People know what's gonna sell. They start to do those things as well. Totally fine, makes sense. I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I'm just saying this book really stood out to me as something fresh and unique and really resonated with me. In the story, you're following this woman who is returning back to her small town because her father has just died. Their family runs a funeral parlor, and she has stayed away from her small town for a long time because she doesn't really feel like she fits in there, because she, along with her father, could see ghosts. But now that her father has passed, she is returning home to help take care with all the arrangements, especially because the funeral parlor is going to have to go to someone else in the family now. Meanwhile, in her life, she's also a ghostwriter for this famous writer, and she is having a lot of trouble writing this next romance book because she doesn't believe in romance anymore. She thinks romance is dead. So she's just at a pit in her life, struggling in her career, losing someone in her family, returning to the small town where she doesn't feel accepted, having these strained relationships with her family members. And then while she's there in the town, she starts to see this ghost who's a little familiar and a lot handsome, and they start to hit it off. And I just loved it. I loved everything about this story. It was beautiful. It makes me want to cry just thinking about it. I just loved loved it so much. It was wonderful. This is going to take a place at the top of my shelves where my favorite books sit. I also am just really happy because it's a beautiful book. It's a very beautiful color, very beautiful cover, and oh my goodness, it was as good as everyone says it is. So if you are interested in romance books, if you have heard about this one, you've been putting it off for a while, I certainly recommend picking it up. Next up we have Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris, another B.A. Paris this month, and this one I loved, absolute 5 stars. Also, I didn't say 5 stars to the Dead Romantics, but 5 stars. This was amazing. This one really caught me by surprise. This is a thriller book that a lot of people talk about. It was really well beloved when it came out a couple of years ago, but I did know it had something to do with an abusive relationship and what goes on behind closed doors, and so I didn't think it'd be something that I would be interested in. I thought it might be triggering. I just didn't think it'd be something I would be comfortable reading. But B.A. Paris just has this magical thing about her where she can just take a subject matter that I hate reading about and make it enjoyable for me. I don't really know what that's about, but I actually didn't really enjoy this book. That's not a fair word to use for it because it made me so incredibly mad. It made me so frustrated. I vlogged my experience reading this book. I read it for the Slaughterfest readathon, so you can see just how mad I was in that vlog because I was just so livid the whole time I was reading this. But I was so on this journey with this main character, and I was just so compelled to see how she was going to get out of this awful situation that she gets herself in. It is a little bit over the top, but it also just felt so realistic at the same time. Difficult to explain, makes sense up here, that's what matters. But yeah, I really had a good time with it. It was really engaging, really well written, and if it is one that you've had on your list for a while, I would say I think it's worth picking up because it really pulled me in and it made me experience a lot of emotions. Speaking of emotional reads, we also have We Spread by Ian Reid. Absolute 5-star. Absolutely wonderful. I just cannot express how meaningful this book was to me. I really loved it. I really love this book. I also ended up reading this one during the Slaughterfest readathon. It did not fit any of the prompts. I just got the hold of my library during that week and really wanted to read it. So you can see my thoughts more in the moment in that vlog as well if you're interested. This is a story where following this woman who has recently lost her partner. She is an older woman and she is kind of starting to lose her memories and the sense of where she is and really starting to seemingly be dealing with the symptoms of dementia. When it is clear that she is no longer able to live by herself, she gets moved to this facility where it was apparently agreed upon her and her partner that she would go live there after her partner's death, which she doesn't have memory of. And as she is moving into this facility, it is unclear whether there is something sinister going on or whether it is the effect of her lived experience with dementia as to why she feels like there might be something sinister going on. So this is more of a psychological book. It is more of an existential book. It is a very sorrowful book, and it is also an ambiguous book. So if you don't like ambiguous books, would not recommend it for you, but if you do like ambiguous books, I think you're really going to appreciate this one. It just resonated with me so much. It just gave me such an emotional experience, and I totally see why people don't love this book, why they feel like nothing happened, why they don't understand what is going on in the book, but this is one that just really, really worked for me. I just really loved it. This is the second book I've read from Ian Reid. I've also read I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and I own Foe. So I'm planning on reading Foe next, hopefully by the end of this year. Very excited for it because We Spread was just amazing. So that is it for all the books I read in the month of November. A very long reading month, but also a very good reading month. I feel like I've just been in a really good groove with my reading lately where I'm just picking up what I want, when I want, and I am enjoying the books a lot more. So that's been really fun for me. I hope you've been having a good reading month too. Let me know down in the comments below how your November went for you in your reading. Let me know if you've read any of the books I talked about and what you think about them. And with the last month of the year coming up in December, let me know what you're hoping to get to by the end of the year as well. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!